Joining us now, she does a ton of sports. Of course, some of our audience obviously knows her from her softball play-by-play and the host of the Women's College World Series. But she has a longer list on her resume than that. She does college football, does college basketball, does volleyball, including now the semifinals and the national championship this week from Omaha coverage on ESPN. She's going to be the play-by-play voice alongside Holly McPeak, as well as others, the cast of thousands behind the scenes and in front of the camera there. I speak of Courtney Lyle, joins us for the first time here on In the Circle. First, congrats, and how you doing? That's a bit. I hope I got all the sports in there. Actually, I didn't. I know I didn't, but at least I got some of them in.
Eric, thanks for having me. It's such an exciting week. I cannot tell you how honored I am to get to call the national semifinals and the national championship. It's been a goal of mine for a while now. I absolutely love this sport. If you're new to volleyball, please tune in because I promise you, you're going to be a fan after tonight. But it's so exciting, and I can't wait for these women to take the national stage tonight.
Yeah, I mentioned Katie George will be also part of the broadcast, who I knew when she was the Milwaukee Bucks sideline reporter. She probably doesn't remember that, but that was back in the NBA coverage days. And obviously, she covers a lot of softball as well. And Eric Freed will be the pregame host, which was the role you used to have. Now, let me first ask you about that, because you're joining an incredible list. You're Paul Sunderland called the national championship for many years, one of the goats of volleyball voices, as well as Beth Mowins before him, who called the national championship for, I think, over a decade. And people forget, did a lot of volleyball along with softball. What's it like to join that group of illustrious voices to be calling the semis in a national championship?
Well, the bar is very high because that list that you just named is a lot of excellent voices. And it's been great to be able to be a part of the coverage in the studio role over the last few years to see how the game crew approaches it. It's also been great to work on softball and watch Beth Mowins go to work and see how she handles crowning a national champion. So all of that experience has been really beneficial to me. I've kind of really focused on what is that moment going to be like? What is the moment going to feel like for these women who have worked their whole lives? I mean, when they pick a school to go to college, they're trying to win a national championship. A lot of them, that is their goal. And so for four teams, they have a shot at that. So it's been really great to be able to listen and learn from all those voices in the different roles, crowning champions. And I hope that I can do them justice on Saturday.
When you knew that you were getting this assignment to call the semis in the championship, I know as broadcasters we always tell ourselves you treat it like another broadcast. That being said, do you seek out advice to others as far as, hey, what, preparation for a semis final, or do you stick with the same kind of formula that you've been doing up until this point?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I love prepping. And as you know, like that's what we spend the most of our time doing, right? So if you don't like prepping, then you probably shouldn't do this job because I spend way more time prepping than actually calling a game or a match or whatever it is that I'm doing. So I approach every sport the same way. I put in the same amount of prep work so that when I get to those big moments, like I do the SEC women's basketball tournament, I don't change anything prep wise because I'm already putting in all the hard work for every regular season game I do. Same thing for volleyball. I put in that same amount of work, 110% effort, because that's exactly what these teams deserve for me to tell their story. So the prep is not different. I do think it's been really great to collaborate with the team that we have here with Katie George and Holly McPeak, who are going to be both of our analysts. Katie will be a sideline analyst, and Holly will be at the table next to me as our lead analyst. But it's been great to collaborate with them. We've had a lot of conversations about what's important, what are they looking for each team. So I think that kind of preparation going in and knowing the direction that they're looking for can help me bring out that analysis. And that's been really beneficial, even if on the biggest stage or even just during a regular season match.
How do you compare covering the volleyball semis and the national championship? You've done it as a host. Now you're going to do it as play-by-play. Obviously, there's differences there, but describe that moment with the difference there as far as being a host versus play-by-play for a major event like this?
Well, I consider it an honor to be that voice to tell the story of how a team succeeds, how a team fails at this level, who makes it to that national championship match, and who wins it all. I don't want to take away from the moment. I want to get in, say what say what happens, and then get out and let the moment breathe. And I can tell you too, Eric, for fans that get to watch our broadcast tonight, we have a lot of fun toys for you. We've got really cool camera angles. We've got a camera angle in the stanchion that's going to be underneath the net. We have super cam that'll be flying over the court. So I want to let that whole experience breathe too, and get a feel of a sold out crowd playing on the biggest stage. So it's balancing all of those things and making sure that you're telling the story correctly, but then also letting it breathe at the same time.
You mentioned the word balance, which I think describes your career, and I'd shortchanged you in the intro. I'm going to mention most of the sports here, and if I forget one, you'll let me know. You call college football now.
Mm-hmm.
You call volleyball. You call women's basketball, softball, beach volleyball. Anything I'm missing there?
Little League softball.
Little League softball. That's in the summer. So we've
Yeah.
established you don't have any time off, although you're getting married at some point. So you're going to have to somehow fit all that in.
I know.
I guess the question is, how do you do all of that? Because that's not easy to jump from sport to sport like you do in various roles. Because, it's hard enough to follow a sport year round and focus and do a broadcast there. You're doing various different roles, different sports with different analysts. So for our audience, take us through your calendar year, because that's an insane amount of sports to be doing. So take us through that.
Yeah, of course. And as it goes back to, Eric, like, you have got to love the preparation, right? Because if you don't, like, that's what I spend most of my time doing. I would say November is probably the craziest, because I literally had a week where I had a football game, a volleyball match, and a women's basketball game all in the same week. So it's making sure that I set out time specifically. I make a list for every day of what I'm going to focus on. And what I'm going to get done, so that when I, get to the coaches meetings for whatever sport I'm doing, I'm prepared and ready to ask them intelligent questions about their team, because I've watched and I understand them. And then make sure that I'm ready to help my next crew, whatever game that is. But I love going from sport to sport, because it's just different. It's nice to get a change. Like, you get into volleyball, and now, like, after this week is over, I'll be really excited to get into some basketball and doing some men's basketball on SEC Network this year too. So that'll be really exciting. And I love the transition. I love the transition going into softball. It's like a new challenge, and it gets you re-energized, because if you're doing that many sports, like, it can be a little tiring. So it's kind of nice to have that new refresher of, oh, something new is coming, a new season, new stories to tell. So I love the switching from sport to sport.
Yeah, I can relate to that. This fall, I got to do soccer, and I actually got to call volleyball for a full year. So I actually paid a lot more. I mean, I always pay attention to your broadcast, but this year I actually really locked in on your volleyball broadcast more, because I'm trying to steal notes for yours. And I can tell you about your passion for the game. And you mentioned it. You've loved volleyball. So where did that come from, your passion for volleyball?
So I didn't really play volleyball. I played in middle school on the middle school team, but that's because everybody made the team, Eric. And so I made the team too. And then I went to Brentwood High School in Tennessee, in Nashville, and their team was very good, and I had no chance. So I started calling the matches there on our little educational access channel in the county when I was in high school. And I just fell in love with the sport, because if you watch it, I mean, every point, I think one of our crew members said it best, every point is a slam dunk, like in the NBA. I mean, it's a huge kill. Some athletic play, every single point. And if that doesn't get you excited to watch a match, I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible how athletic these women are. And so that kind of, I mean, it's easy to call it, right? I mean, I'm sure you've experienced this, because every point is like so exciting. So that makes it really fun.
It is, and it's challenging because it's fast too. So it's a little different than the other sports, where maybe like softball, you have more time to kind of talk about certain players or certain storylines. Volleyball, next thing you know, they're going 2, 3, 4 points right in a big. So how big of an adjustment is that when you go from one sport to another that maybe have different tempos from that standpoint?
Absolutely. And you know this too. I mean, my goodness, volleyball and softball could not be more different speeds. And softball is pretty fast,
Yeah.
compared to baseball. So yeah, you've got to learn, like, you've got to know the players, obviously. There's that fine balance too. Since I'm calling volleyball on TV, I know the viewer can see it. I don't have to call every single thing. There's that fine balance of saying exactly what happened at that time, getting out quickly so my analysts can get in. I can tell you too, our crew has trouble getting replays in. That's an art in itself, because it is so fast from point to point. But I love that. I think it helps you keep the energy up, and I hope that the viewer can see that and can feel that too when I'm calling a match.
Of all the sports you've done, which one to you was the easiest to kind of, I mean, you don't, I mean, we all as broadcast, we never master it, right? We're always looking for that perfect broadcast. It's out there, but we don't get it. There's always room for improvement. That being said, which sport was more easier for you to sort of jive, and which sport did you actually feel like was the hardest to kind of get used to?
Sure. So I grew up playing basketball and loving basketball. Like I had a basketball in my hand, like age 3, learning to dribble around the neighborhood with my dad. So I probably knew the most about basketball. That was probably a good baseline. We watched all kinds of sports growing up, and that's kind of how I got into this field. So probably my best baseline for knowledge was basketball. I've learned a lot about volleyball and calling it and learning from high school, calling it in college. And then that was actually the first sport that I ever called linear for SEC Network, meaning it was actually on your TV and not just on the ESPN app, was volleyball back in 2015. So I think basketball had that good baseline. The hardest one, I did field hockey for Tokyo 2020. That was a tough one for me, Eric. That was a tough one, but I learned it, and we did it.
I forgot, yeah, and I forgot to mention that. See, I'm telling your resume's lengthy. I don't know how you do it, but like you did get to call the hey, look, it's the Olympics. That was that remote too? You had that was the challenge too, because obviously what was going on with COVID in the world and everything, you had to do that remotely. So you had to do field hockey, which is hard in general, but then you're doing it on a remote, basically from a monitor, right?
Yeah, we did it in Stamford, Connecticut. So I think there was a 15-hour time difference. So we were working overnight and calling matches in a booth, and my analyst was in a booth next to me. So that was really challenging, but it was fun because I do like the challenge of having to learn. I did not know anything about field hockey. So I watched every match from Rio. I read the rule book a million times. If I heard them mention something in a match from the Rio ones that I was watching, I would write down the term if I didn't understand it and look it up. I picked the brain of several of my friends that have played field hockey and obviously leaned on my analyst heavily. But that was one of the sports I had to do that for. And then I used to do gymnastics for SEC Network too. That's a whole nother animal that I had to learn a lot about. But I love the challenge. Like, right, I'm sure you're experiencing this too, getting to do volleyball, getting to do soccer, like digging into those sports a little bit more.
Yeah, no, that's the fun challenge you made. It kind of breathes extra energy into it because you're right. If you do one sport after a while, you enjoy it, but it does get monotonous at times. It's kind of routinish a little bit, whereas the other sports kind of brings a little extra spring to it, a little bit there from that standpoint. Now, you mentioned when you started. Tell the audience, for they may not know, how you started at ESPN because you were an intern at one point, I believe at ESPN. Because I remember when we met in Tampa, Florida. For those that don't know, in the American Conference Championship, you were working with Jenny Dalton Hill at the time. I had known Jenny because I've hung out with Jenny in the past. She introduced me to you because I think that was your first year working with her at that time. So tell me the path to how you got to ESPN.
Sure. So I was really lucky that I knew at an early age that I wanted to be in broadcasting and I wanted to be in sports broadcasting. I grew up in a family that we love sporting events. We went to sporting events all the time. I played every sport. I was not good at any of them, but I still wanted to be around sports. So I went to the University of Tennessee, graduated, worked in local news for about 5 years, Macon, Georgia, and then Knoxville, Tennessee. And when the SEC Network launched, Tennessee, since I had worked in the athletic department, asked if I was interested in doing some of their digital games, meaning the games that are just on the ESPN app that the schools have to produce for ESPN. And so I thought it would be great. And I'm very lucky that I was ready for the opportunity when it came because Meg Aronowitz, who obviously is huge in the softball world with ESPN, one of our vice presidents, she came to Tennessee to review tape with them and give some feedback. And she happened to pick a game that I had called and she liked it. So here we are in 2022, and I've been at ESPN since 2016 full time.
Wow. Do you know what game she picked of yours? Because that's kind of wild that, right? Like it's kind of scary in a way that she picked one random game you did. I mean, you always try to excel in every game, but sometimes, it's not your best day. So do you have any idea which game she picked? And like, you're like, well, thank goodness she picked that one.
Yeah, so it was a women's basketball game. I don't remember who the Lady Vols were playing, but I do know that it was a basketball game. So that's what I always tell like young broadcasters. You're going to get that opportunity. You got to be ready for it. So get those extra reps in, do whatever you can do to make sure that when that one opportunity comes, you're ready to go. And I'm very, very thankful that I was ready.
So you were obviously being around Tennessee. I would imagine you have some Brian Rice stories there.
Of course, we called so many soccer matches. And I don't need to be calling soccer. I'll tell you that right now. That is not my strong suit. But we certainly did it. We certainly did it. This was way before the SEC network launched.
I did not know that he did soccer either. So you're breaking news to me here. I have to bring this up to him next time I get him on the show. That's pretty crazy. Do you remember the first time you did softball, and how did you get involved on the softball end?
Yeah. So the first time I had done some softball in high school, like we had talked about with that little educational access channel in the county. But I did some games when I was at Tennessee, and then I did some digital games for them when I was working at the local news station in Knoxville, and then also kind of doing games on the side. So I don't remember my exact first softball game, but I do remember being around the Lady Ball softball program a lot because I was working and living in Knoxville. So
That helped because I really bring that up because I think for your ESPN work, the thing that first kind of people took notice of your work was softball. When you were doing play-by-play, a lot of softball fans followed you closely. In fact, this year you finished runner-up. Extra Inning Softball did the Golden Mike Awards. You finished runner-up for Best National Play-by-Play broadcaster behind Beth Mowins, which I feel in itself that's like a win, right? Like if you're finished runner-up to Beth, that's a win.
that's a huge win because I'm a huge Beth Mowins fan. So I'll
Yeah,
take that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, you finished runner-up to the GOAT of softball play-by-play there. But just tell me, what was it like once you got into the national scene? Because I remember you worked with Jenny Dalton Hill. You've worked with a lot of different analysts there. Amanda Scarborough, Michelle Smith, Danielle Laurie last year. What was that like to do the softball on a national level and see the explosion? Because I feel like you're now seeing this in volleyball. I see comparisons there where you're seeing explosions from a coverage and audience standpoint of volleyball, kind of similar to what we've seen in softball.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think softball has set the standard for how you can grow a sport. And it's been incredible to watch. And I'm so lucky. You're right. I've gotten to work with so many amazing analysts, Jenny Dalton Hill, into Amanda Scarborough, Michelle Smith, and then this last season with Danielle Laurie, Kayla Bro for one season. So I love that I've had all those experiences because they all have different softball minds. So getting to pick their brain for a full season and learn how they see the game, what stands out to them, what they like about certain players for the pitchers out there like Amanda and Michelle, what they like in a pitcher, what they don't like, habits, that kind of thing. So I feel like that's really helped my softball knowledge grow. But it is incredible to see the explosion of the sport. The St. Pete tournament that ESPN has put on, that just continues to grow. The first time going to the World Series, Eric, I will never forget. I mean, the crowd, the enthusiasm, that is an incredible environment in Oklahoma City. And it's so great that it repeats year after year. And I love that they have all the travel ball tournaments surrounding it so the young girls can come and watch the women competing in the World Series and say, hey, I want to do that someday. So to see that growth, that excitement around the sport has been incredible to watch.
Yeah, it's been an explosion. And I kind of see that now too with volleyball and the TV exposure there. You mentioned all the different analysts you work with softball. You work with a lot of different analysts in all the different sports. Obviously, women's basketball, football. I think Ryan Leaf was most. You work with a lot of Ryan Leaf, for example, in football. Carol Peck in women's basketball. Holly McPeak, etc. How do you adjust going from not only sport to sport, but working with different analysts and different personalities that they bring? Because every person has their own style. Some are more outgoing than others. Take me through that approach as far as working with different analysts in a different sport.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I remember hearing Jim. I'm a big Jim Nance fan. I love his call. I love how he relates to his analysts. And I remember him talking one time about how important it is to get to know your analyst outside of the broadcast. And maybe you're not talking about the sport that you're covering. Maybe you're talking about their life and their family and their hobbies and things they like to do or their favorite memory from their playing days. And that's all going to translate to when you guys sit down and you talk for 2 hours or 4 hours, depending on what sport you're doing. And so I feel like that's really important to get to know the analyst off off of the mic. And I'm so lucky too that there's been fantastic people that I work with. I'm friends with all the people that I work with. And I love to get to know who they are. And then I can, I feel a little more comfortable when we get on air to, hey, joke with them a little bit. Or I know like, oh my goodness, Holly McPeak was a really scrappy defender on the beach. She was a great setter on the indoor side. So I know I can ask her, like, if we see a great if we see a libero make a great defensive play, I know that she's getting juiced about that. So I can kind of pull those things out of her. But getting to know that person outside of the broadcast is really important.
And with Holly McPeak, I believe you've worked the beach volleyball
Mm-hmm.
with her. How much has that helped you as far as now you're going to be working with her in the semis and the championship? You've called with matches with her throughout the year. So I imagine that has to help you, especially on weeks like you mentioned early in November where you're going from sport to sport, knowing that analyst inside out that you can just jump in and you don't have to worry about, you can catch up and it's just like that has to help you as well.
Absolutely. And it definitely does. That familiarity. It's been great to be able to call the beach national championship with her for the past several years. And then she's taught me a lot too about the beach volleyball and indoor volleyball are very different. They're very different sports, and not every person that plays indoor can go play on the beach. It's just a different skill set that you have to have. So she's taught me a lot about that. I mean, we text and talk all the time about the sport of, hey, I'm watching this team and I can't believe I love this setter, or this outside hitter is just incredible for this team. So that conversation is ongoing, even if it's just a text here and there. And then also we sneak in a text about like, hey, should we go to this restaurant? Like we're both foodies. So like we spend time like exploring the cities that we're in, talking about the sport. So that makes it way easier. We can just sit down and call the match and have a lot of fun.
Yeah, I've seen that on the Instagram. Yes, that's a
Yep.
very key factor. So deal there. Now, one of the teams you're calling, obviously in the Final Four, is San Diego. That, to me, they've been the story of college volleyball this year. People have been wondering, would they get a 1 seed? How good can they compete? They did. Not only they did, they proved it. They beat Stanford in a 5-setter, and now they're in the Final Four. It kind of reminds me a little bit of JMU in softball when they made the run a couple years ago, which you covered there as well. Do you see similarities between the two there? Because people got caught up in JMU during that run that maybe weren't necessarily softball fans. I feel like San Diego is kind of similar from a volleyball standpoint.
Yeah, San Diego is definitely the Cinderella. And they've had this motto all year, why not us? Like no one expected us to be in this situation. But it was funny, I was actually in researching them a little bit deeper as they made it to the national semifinals. I was reading a preview article for the season from back in August, I think. And they talked about all these goals they had, how they felt confident in their teammates and the pieces they put together. And it was really fun to see all of that actually happen, to make their very first national semifinal in program history. They're on a 28 match winning streak. That's a program record. And I think there are some similarities because there is just like Odyssey was that key piece for JMU in the circle. I think a key piece for San Diego has been their quarterback, if you will, their setter, Gabby Blossom, who transferred in from Penn State. She came in January. She took the time to get to know her hitters. They run she runs fast sets to the outside. She runs different tempos too to different hitters. That's not an easy thing to do. So for her to step in, she waited her turn to kind of figure out the personalities and then let her voice come out. And I think she's really helped that program blossom. And then you have a 5th-year player like Katie Lukes, who's on the outside, that knows, what San Diego is about. I think just all the pieces coming together, and they believe. And they believe in themselves. They're not listening to any outside noise of, should they be here? Should they have been a 2 seed? Should they have been a 1 seed? Maybe they should have. But doesn't matter because they got to the national semifinals. So that's definitely an interesting story to watch. And they're going to face Texas in our first match tonight at 7 on ESPN.
That's going to be big time there. And then Louisville and Pittsburgh, kind of the ACC. And the big story, obviously, is no Big Ten, no Pac-12 teams in the field for the first time ever in volleyball. That's a big story for those deal there. Talk about the parity there, because we're starting to see that. We've seen that in softball with some of the different teams that have gotten to OKC. We're seeing that in women's basketball too. It's no longer just, hey, it's UConn and everybody else now. Now there's a lot of like kind of wide open. Do you sense that in volleyball too? We're seeing this now where there's a lot more parity than people realize in the sport.
Absolutely, I do. Because you're seeing teams upset different teams. We saw that in the regular season. I mean, Iowa State was able to beat Texas. They're the only team that's beaten Texas this year. I think, too, the transfer portal has a lot to do with that. Like a San Diego can go out and get Gabby Blossom, who makes a huge impact right away. They already had good pieces in place to be around her. And look, here they are in the national semifinal. We have the chance. Texas has 2 NCAA championships, but the other 3 programs don't. So we have a chance to have a 3rd straight new national
Wow.
champion Kentucky won it in 2020. That was their first. That was the first title for the SEC, actually. Then Wisconsin won last year. That was their first national champion. So it's become, like you said, no Pac-12, no Big Ten teams for the first time ever in the national semifinals. So you're seeing the sport grow all over the country, and that's very exciting.
You got to host the studio for the selection show this year for volleyball. You did it, ironically, for softball earlier in the year, which UCF fans are big fans of yours just because of that, because you were the one that got to announce UCF hosting, and you got that famous crowd reaction from them, which was really the reaction of that show. Was their reaction excited? I was next to them, so trust me, it was loud. What's it like hosting a selection show? And compare and contrast volleyball and softball from a hosting selection show standpoint.
Sure. First of all, it's really exciting because it's like I have the bracket for several hours before anyone else does, and that's a very fun feeling to know, like, oh, this team is in. Oh no, this team didn't make it. Like, I don't. Yeah. So it's really exciting. And I think going into the volleyball selection show, we really wanted to showcase the parity, talk about different teams, not just talk about the teams that had been at the top. So it was so great to have Jen Petrie come on from San Diego and get to talk to her. We got to talk to Danielle Hart from Wisconsin, the defending national champions, who she wasn't able to play last year because she was injured. So it was really cool to have different perspectives, but also to look at the bracket and say, look, I have the roadmap right in front of me of what's coming. And I can't imagine what that feeling is like to see your name actually pop up on the screen. But I'm really thankful that I've gotten to host a couple of selection shows now. But Beth, please come back. I was just pinch hitting for her because she was unavailable for the selection show. So Beth Mowens, please come back to softball.
Yeah, you had a little more time to prepare on the volleyball. And although I won't forget, Katie George was pumping up McKenna Melville from UCF and how great she is. She's like, watch out, Yale. And then she realized, oh, wait, sorry, Corey. She apologized to you, which was kind of a funny moment there where she just kind of yelled, just kind of blurted out, hey, Yale, you're playing UCF there. That was that was a unique way.
I had to call her out. I had to call her out on that. I was like, Katie, we haven't told them that they're in yet, but they were an automatic qualifier, so they knew. But
they knew they were in. They didn't know who they were playing on there. But what was interesting is volleyball this year, along with women's soccer, seeded 32 teams.
Yes.
1 through 8 region wise. What's your thoughts on that, having gone through that? And do you think softball should look into it?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I hope that we can grow so we're seeding 64 teams eventually. I think it was good too for volleyball because it took some of the regionalization out of the equation, whereas they used to have to look at location. Okay, what team can bus to this site? So UCF going to Florida or going to Florida State or hosting and those two teams coming to them, that kind of thing. So that took some of that out of it. Which was good. I think we had a little bit more competitive matches. I only think that's going to help grow. But also it takes a step forward in growing the sport. And that's exactly what volleyball is trying to do now. We've had great ratings on TV. We've had sold out crowds. The national semifinals and the championship matches are already sold out. So I think it's just the next step into continuing the growth of volleyball, which is one of the most popular growing sports right now. There's a lot of women choosing volleyball over basketball right now. And so that's helping the talent pool grow and the sport grow as a whole.
With as many sports as you do, I'm curious, do you take something from one sport that you did and you're like, ooh, I'm going to apply that to this sport? Or do you even pitch ideas to either producers or directors that you figured out from one sport to another? Not necessarily as far, maybe an idea of something that worked. Like, full disclosure, one of the reasons I was approached and asked to do volleyball for this year for UCF was because of the job I did on the softball end. And some of the things that we did from a softball production standpoint and some of the things we did that I suggested, they said, hey, can you do that for volleyball?
Yeah.
Sorry, ideas. So I'm curious from your standpoint, having done so many sports, do you get ideas from other sports that you use for, either you get something from volleyball you're going to use to softball or vice versa?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially when it comes to humanizing the athletes and telling their story, I've definitely taken one way that I've presented something and taken it to another sport. Or also ideas for graphic lists. I think it was 2020 in basketball. We did a comparison for South Carolina, who was number one at the time, to Baylor, who had won it the year before, and their stat comparison. And it was like very eerily similar. Did that same thing in a different sport. I can't remember which one it was, comparing it to the last national champion. But there's little things that you take and you can repurpose a good idea. The whole goal is to make sure that you're telling the story the best way possible and hopefully forming a connection with the viewer and the team and the athlete. So if there's a great way to do it, why not translate it over to another sport?
Describe, you do conference calls, you deal with coaches in all these sports. Describe the volleyball coaches versus the softball coaches versus women's basketball coaches. Because you've obviously covered many of the strong personalities and top coaches in each of those sports. What's it, compare and contrast those coaches?
I think most coaches are excited to talk about their team. There's a few that want to, I mean, this, especially in football, there's some that keep everything very tight to the vest, and that's okay. I totally understand that. But there's a lot of, most coaches want to talk about the athletes they're coaching. They want to tell their story. They want to give you something to talk about on air. We met with all four teams yesterday. That is one of the funnest days because we got three players from each team. We got to talk to the coach individually to figure out those personalities. So, and I can tell you that all four of these volleyball coaches absolutely love their programs. They love the women that they're coaching. They love these teams and what they've accomplished this year. And so that's one of the funnest parts is getting to pick their brain about their team. And it's really cool to see how much this team means to them.
Was there a part of you that was jealous that you were the only regional final that didn't go 5 sets on Saturday? Like you went 4. You like, are you kidding me? Come on.
I mean, I was ready for 5 because I mean that fifth set, it's only to 15 points, so it goes so fast and like your heart's racing. Like I'm sure your Apple Watch is probably like, you need to calm down. But it's very exciting. So yeah, it was kind of sad. I will say I had a great time after we were off air getting to go back and watch some of the matches. We didn't get to see all of Oregon, Louisville because we were on air at the same time and doing rehearsals and things like that. So it was just as exciting to go back and watch them for a second time, some of those matches, even though I knew what was going to happen, because that fifth set is just so much adrenaline, and every little thing, every little detail is so important because it only goes to 15 points.
Yeah, especially the Pitt, Wisconsin. That was like 3.5 hours. Like it was kind of wild. Thankfully, I had the San Diego match on my computer and I had the Wisconsin match on the TV. But it was a good problem to have in that there were a lot of people that are like, man, I wish these matches were spread out more. That's a good sign because we've heard this too in softball, where people are like, man, I wish these matches are either spread out or whatever. That means people care and there are more people are watching. So that's always a good sign.
Absolutely, it is. And yeah, there were definitely exciting ones. I mean, don't forget, Oregon had match point in the fourth set and then lost in the fifth set. Oh, heartbreaking. So that was fun to talk to Louisville about too, in our meetings yesterday.
Yeah, each of these teams have a great story there. Now, you've got a great crew you're working with, so everybody expects everything great. But I guess there's good news is if something goes wrong, if for whatever reason you're knocked off the air, you have experience going on Instagram and providing a broadcast like you had to do in the Big 12 tournament this year with Danielle Laurie. I have to ask you about that because that thing, you and Danielle that was viral. Everybody all of a sudden was like, wait, she's going to the match on Instagram. Take us through that day and how did you quickly come up with the idea of like, why don't we just go on Instagram and give people broadcasts from there until they figure this out?
Yeah, so it was the Big 12 tournament championship. It was Oklahoma, who was number 1, and Oklahoma State. And it was in the 8th inning, I think, and the bases were loaded, and Oklahoma State had a chance to win. And I was like, oh my goodness. So what happened was we had a little generator issue, and the generator, it's a giant generator. It's not like one that you rent at a hardware store. Something happened with it and it failed. And so we lost power. So our crew is actually back in Charlotte. So like our producer, director, they're back in Charlotte. So I just lose comms to them and everything. And so I'm calling them on the phone and like seeing if they can hear me. But then I realized we have no way to document this, and Oklahoma could be upset, and they eventually were. And I said, I've got to make sure that we have some way to document it. So I'm just going to go on Instagram Live real quick and try to let you know what's happening, but also try to get our communication back to our producer in Bristol. The best part, Eric, was somebody on the live stream was like, isn't this a copyright infringement? And I was like, bro, get out of here. We have no cameras here right now. Just calm down. It's going to be fine. I don't think ESPN is going to sue me since we're off air right now.
Yeah.
Thank you for your concern.
Gotta love it. People care about those copyrights that we read. We wondered
Yeah.
if people actually paid attention. Apparently they do. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
They read it. But I give you credit for that because, like, I've been in that situation, and usually I'm just being mad, like, oh man, when are we gonna get on the air? But you were quick enough to think about going on Instagram. That's pretty impressive.
Well, I hope I never have to do it again.
Nobody does, but at least you have background experience there.
Hmm.
Do you have a quick Danielle Laurie story?
Oh man, so many, first of all, but she's been fantastic to work with. It's been really cool to pick her brain too about coming out of retirement to pitch for Canada and Tokyo. We do workouts in the gym together before games, and that is really tough for some of us who aren't Olympians and aren't bronze medalists, but we get the job done for sure. But I absolutely love working with her.
You've worked with a lot of different Olympians in various sports, haven't you? Like, I mean,
I
Holly,
know.
Danielle, didn't you work with Karch Karai at one point for a
I did.
match?
I was with Karch last year, who was probably the greatest volleyball player of all time. And Holly McPeak this year has an Olympic bronze medal on the beach. So how lucky am I? It's very cool.
That's a Man, that's a good resume. Is there? I don't know if this is possible. Is there a sport you haven't called you would like to call? I feel like you've called just about everything you would like to call, but maybe I'm wrong.
Ooh.
Is there something you'd like to call?
I think the big goal for me was football, and I've been so lucky to have opportunities the last 3 years with ESPN to do that. Um, so yeah, I think I'm good right now. I'd love more men's basketball.
Hey, that's big. I didn't realize you're doing men's basketball there. Is there an event you like to cover either as a host? Because you're versatile. You've done hosting, you've done play by play, you've done sideline as well, I believe, during your time.
Mhm.
Is there an event you'd like to? Ooh, I'd like to cover that in whatever role.
Oh man, I mean, the ultimate goal someday, I would love to do the women's Final Four and national championship. We have a fantastic crew right now. Ryan, Rebecca, Holly, and Andrea do an amazing job. Someday, I would love to do that, but they're pretty good at it, so it may be a while.
That's true. That's good. Last question. And when you go on the air tonight, you go on the air this weekend. Is there something you will tell yourself, or you do, like routine wise? Because every match is unique. It's big. It's exciting. There's obviously there's a lot of stuff in your mind as a broadcaster. Is there something you tell yourself or you do to either say, "All right, I'm locked in. I'm calm." Is there a routine you have or something you tell yourself before you go on the air?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this moment this week, and just sitting in the gym last night. We were kind of just waiting for things to happen. I just took a minute to go sit down by myself and then look around and look at the stage that we get to be on. And I just want to remind myself, and I've kind of talked to myself about this a little bit this week, is that this was a dream for all of these women to be here. And how cool is it that we get to be a part of it? Because it's not always the case that your dreams become reality. I'm growing up, I thought I wanted to play basketball for Pat Summit, and I realized I wasn't very good enough. So that never happened. But for these women, this dream is a reality. So let's make sure they have the absolute best stage. Let's make sure we tell their stories the best. And you know what? Go out and have fun. I feel like when I'm having fun, I hope that comes across in my broadcast, and I hope that'll get some new fans of these amazing teams that we have here in Omaha.
Well, we're excited to hear your voice this weekend. Again, ESPN Thursday night starts at 7. San Diego and Texas, followed by Louisville and Pittsburgh. You and Holly McPeak and Katie George on the broadcast. Eric Freed, who will be the host. Did you have to give him advice as far as being the host, having done it? No?
Oh no, Eric Freed is a pro. He is such a pro. We're so lucky to have him here with us too.
It's going to be a great crew. It's going to be a great time. Hey, congratulations on this. I know this is a big deal for you. I'm really excited for you. I've always enjoyed your work. I'll thank you in advance this year because I stole a lot of your little nuances you did in volleyball listening closely. I was the one that was taking notes there. Oh, okay, that's what she said. All right, I may use that. So thank you for that. And I'm probably going to be texting Jenny Dalton Hill at some point this week and say, can you believe that? Your former broadcaster there? So hey, enjoy it. Congrats. Well deserved. And thank you for taking the time. I know it's such a hectic schedule for you, but I really wanted to kind of give you the kind of the platform to talk about this great moment for you. Enjoy it. And thanks for taking the time.
Eric, thank you for giving me the opportunity to come on. And thanks for talking about volleyball. I'm really excited. And make sure you tune in tonight because I know you'll be a fan after you do.